Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome in for another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. A lot of really interesting matchups over the course of the weekend. Some blowouts, one surprise, and one game closer to a WCC championship for St. Mary's. So we'll get into the recaps in just a little bit. We'll talk about we'll preview some of the early week games as well. We do have the late game this week, which is St. Mary's Gonzaga. So obviously we'll talk about that later on as we get closer to that game. Also going to start to map out the scenarios for seedings for the WCC tournament, what it's starting to look like. We have a bit of a clearer picture now with only 2 weeks left. And for some of these teams, 3 games, some 4 games. So we're down to it. And I think we have a much clearer idea of how everything's going to shake out for the seedings and when everyone will start in Las Vegas in just a little over 2 weeks, which it's crazy that we're already here. It's almost March. And this is, I know for a lot of you, for me, this is one of the more exciting times of the sports calendar. March Madness is just shortly around the corner, so this is going to be a lot of fun the next few weeks. So I'm going to go over at least a quick recap some of what we saw over the course of the weekend. So I'll start off with Gonzaga getting a massive win over Pepperdine. Not necessarily because of the opponent, but the fact that they won 107-55. It was the Zags' 5th 100-point game of the season, their 20th win of the year, their 26th straight season, hitting that 20-win mark. Caleb Battle with 24. Nolan Hickman, 18.7 assists. They held Pepperdine to 29% from the field. And this has been kind of a little bit of the staple of what we've seen from Gonzaga over the last month or so. Since that Santa Clara game when they allowed 103 points at the Kennel, they have held 6 of their 7 opponents to 62 or fewer points, and they are 6-1 in that stretch. So clearly the Zags have started to figure something out and put the pieces together and are looking more like the team we saw earlier on in the season when they were really kind of like hanging their hat on that defense, and it got away from them a little bit toward the beginning of conference play. St. Mary's getting a win over Washington State at UCU Pavilion, 77-56. That was a close game throughout the first half, but there was the separation that was built in the second. 30 points, 10 rebounds for Paulius Morauskas on Lithuanian night. 11th WCC game where St. Mary's has allowed 60 or fewer points. 11 of 14 have been in that category. They maintained that 2-game lead on the Zags for the first place spot. Washington State 15 turnovers to only 6 for St. Mary's. Again, always kind of highlighting that turnover problem that Washington State has had. It really did bite them again in the second half of this game. The Cougs are 2-6 on the road in WCC play, and they do finish the West Coast swing, or like the Northern California swing, 0-4 against WCC opponents. USF rebounded after its loss to Gonzaga, getting a 23-point win, 84-61 over San Diego. Malik Thomas and Marcus Williams combined for 43. USF led points in the paint 36-22. They held San Diego to 31% from the field, 2 for 20 from 3. And for San Diego, they are now 1-14 in league, 4-24 overall. They are going to be in danger of having, unfortunately, their worst season ever. They are 4-26, 4-24 overall. The worst mark ever posted in program history was 4-26. So they are only 2 games away from that. Obviously, San Diego will end up playing more games this year than they did that season. But that dates back to the 03-04 year. So they're an unfortunate historical windows right now for the Toreros. Probably the shocker of the weekend, not say big shocker, but Portland getting an 11-point win over LMU, 89-78 on Saturday. Max McKinnon with 29 points, Vukasin, Masic with 21. Portland has now won 3 of its last 4. They're hitting a little bit of a stride right now. They've shot 50% or better in each of those 3 games. They've also shot 44% or better from 3 in each of those wins. LMU just steps backward, lost to both Pacific and Portland last week. And since LMU's 5-game winning streak was snapped about a week and a half ago, they have now lost 4 of 5, and they will finish at Santa Clara this week, and then Pepperdine and St. Mary's to round out conference play. And then Oregon State getting its rebound of a win as well. They had lost to Portland on Thursday. They rebounded and beat Pacific 79-65. That game was tied at half before Oregon State pulled away. They are now 15-2 at Gill Coliseum, defending the home court about as well as anyone would hope. And now looking at what we're going to see, what the scenarios are going into these last couple weeks. So we know St. Mary's is sitting atop the league at 13-1. All but Gonzaga and USF have been eliminated from being the 1 seed. And what St. Mary's needs to do with 4 games left is to win 2. That is all they need to do to clinch an outright championship in the WCC. They're 2 up on Gonzaga in the loss column. They're 2.5 up on USF. USF would have to be near perfect the rest of the way and hope that St. Mary's also just falls completely flat on its face in these last 2 weeks to get the 1 seed, but it's still mathematically possible. With, again, needing 2 wins this week to clinch an outright WCC championship, that does mean that for St. Mary's, they can win at Portland on Wednesday, and then if they get the win at the Kennel on Saturday, they will hoist the WCC championship trophy in Spokane to claim their second straight outright WCC championship and their 3rd straight overall. And St. Mary's will also at least clinch a share of the league title if, say, the Gales win on Wednesday and Gonzaga were to lose to Washington State on that same night. So that's a way that they could clinch a share of the title on Wednesday. But that outright title really does. It could happen this week, and it could happen at the Kennel. So it's something to watch when it comes to the 1 seed and a conference championship for St. Mary's. Obviously, like Gonzaga would need a little bit of help if they're going to get that 1 seed. They would need to beat St. Mary's on Saturday, and then also have someone else beat St. Mary's as well. They do still have Oregon State on the calendar. They do still have LMU. So there's a few teams that maybe could give St. Mary's a run. I'm at this stage not terribly confident that another team would beat St. Mary's other than Gonzaga. So I do think Gonzaga is probably looking for the 2 seed, looking for that bye into the semifinals. And for that path, obviously much easier for the Zags. They do control that path in a very simple way, and it's, win your last 4 games. Which, the way the Zag team is playing, is very possible. Last 4 games are tough, but it's still doable. You'd look at the fact that it's 3 of the last 4 on the road, but it's at Washington State, then home for St. Mary's, then it's at Santa Clara, at USF, really at Chase Center. These last 4. They have lost to 2 of these teams, St. Mary's and Santa Clara, already. But as we know, both of those games were pretty tight down toward the end. Santa Clara is actually probably the one that probably feels a little bit more comfortable, only because that's a team that they were up by double digits late on the road. And so the fact that they let them back in the game is maybe a little bit more on them than what Gonzaga was able to produce in that one. But again, for them, it's very, very simple. You can take care of business that way. But also, if they win 3 of their last 4, one of those, USF must also lose one of its final 3 games. Now, of course, that could very, very easily solved if USF is one of the 3. They do play each other on March 1st. So if Gonzaga does win, let's say Gonzaga wins 3 of its next 4, they lose to St. Mary's. But so long as they beat USF in the finale, they'll be fine. They'll be locked in at 2. So some pretty simple math for Gonzaga to hold on to the 2 seed. But there is still potential that they could slide down to 3. They could slide to 4. The nightmare scenario is mathematically it's possible that they slip to 5, but I just don't see that happening. For USF, a few different scenarios here. So let's work out the 2 seed for them. For USF, it actually is simple as well. If they win out, they are the 2 seed. They have 3 games left. They will be taking on Pacific, and they're on the road at Oregon State, and then come back home for Gonzaga. Those are the 3. If USF wins out, that means they beat Gonzaga. That means they also get a second win against Oregon State. So here's the scenario. If Gonzaga wins 3 of its last 4, and its only losses to USF in the finale, USF holds the tiebreaker between the 2. Because this goes to conference, because they'll have the split between each other. So then you start to look at conference head-to-head going from the top going down. They will both have a split against St. Mary's. They will both have a split against Santa Clara. The separator here is that USF will have swept Oregon State and Gonzaga split with the Beavers. And that would give, so in a tie scenario where USF gets the win over Gonzaga, USF holds the tiebreaker because of the head-to-head with Oregon State as that 5th place team. Now, because the actual separation of the USF's other loss is Washington State, but that's actually, you'd have to get further down the road before that actually even became a scenario. Washington State could end up kind of rolling through its next few games, and if Oregon State falls and LMU falls, yes, Washington State still has the potential to leapfrog both of them. But based on who Washington State also has left, they also play Gonzaga, I don't see them being able to make that climb with such a short period of time left. So also, if USF wins 2 of its last 3 and beats Gonzaga, they will need St. Mary's to also beat Gonzaga, because that would give Gonzaga a 5th loss and give the tiebreaker to USF because of the matchup against St. Mary's, because USF will have beaten them once and Gonzaga will have, in this scenario, swept by the Gales. So there's at least a couple different scenarios where USF can slide into the 2. Now the more complicated one, the everything has to go their way scenario, Santa Clara. It's still possible that Santa Clara can grab the 2 seed, but only if all of these other things happen. It can only happen if 1, Santa Clara wins its remaining 4 games, which doesn't include a win over Gonzaga. That would give Gonzaga has to also have 5 losses, which does mean that Gonzaga must lose an additional game other than the Santa Clara game. That could be Saturday against St. Mary's. It could be USF. Santa Clara would then hold the tiebreaker against the Zags because of the head-to-head matchup. USF must also lose 2 of its last 3 to get to 6 losses. Because USF holds the tiebreaker against Santa Clara, they did split the head-to-head, but then back to conference matchups, USF has beaten St. Mary's, Santa Clara has not. So they need USF to slide to 6 losses and Gonzaga to end up tied with them at 5 losses to have a shot at the 2 seed. That is the scenario where Santa Clara can actually snatch the 2. Now, there's a scenario where they all are at 5 losses. What happens if that were to occur? So that does mean Gonzaga loses 2 of its last 4. USF were to lose one of its next 3, and Santa Clara still wins out. What happens in that scenario? In that scenario, if USF wins 2 of its last 3 and beats Gonzaga, USF is the 2, Santa Clara is the 3, and Gonzaga is the 4. USF does hold the tiebreaker with both of them, holds a tiebreaker versus both with splits and a win over St. Mary's. If USF wins 2 of its next 3 but loses to Gonzaga, this is where I'm going to have to actually check in with the conference office and check, because this gets very chaotic, because the splits, the head-to-heads all get whacked out with this scenario. Because if USF wins 2 of its next 3, they all have 5 losses. That means Gonzaga is 2-0 against USF, 0-2 against Santa Clara. But Santa Clara and USF split against each other. So how the math here is going to work of who's 2, who's 3, who's 4 is going to get far more complicated if that scenario were to occur. Now, I don't think that scenario even has a chance of happening. There are way too many things that have to go right for Santa Clara for all 5 losses to happen. Even the scenario where Santa Clara can end up with the 2, I don't think is realistic, because it assumes Gonzaga loses 2 of its next 4. I don't think that happens. It assumes that USF must also lose 2 of its next 3. I don't think that happens. And it also assumes that Santa Clara wins all of its next 4 games. And I don't think that happens. So I think in a realistic scenario, looking at 2, 3, 4, I think the standings as they are today is likely where they all end up. I think it ends up being Gonzaga at the 2, USF at the 3, Santa Clara at the 4. That is, to me, the most realistic scenario that we have left. And I'm not forgetting about Oregon State, because they are only 1 game back of Santa Clara. The challenge for me thinking about Oregon State is that 3 of their next 4 are on the road, and we know that they have struggled mightily away from Gill Coliseum. And 2 of those games, not 2 of the road games, but 2 games remaining, St. Mary's at St. Mary's, and then also USF. I don't know if they have enough oomph to be able to kind of climb out of that hole and get past Santa Clara. Now, the injuries to Santa Clara might be a factor here. The health of Christoph Tilley, the health of Adama Ball, who both missed the game against missed the game against St. Mary's last week, is a critical factor here, because if those 2 are playing, then obviously Santa Clara is going to have a much better chance of getting through these next 4, which are LMU at Washington State, Gonzaga, and at Pacific. But if they do not have those 2, we'll get into a little bit of just how critical they've been, even in the matchup, say, against LMU on Thursday night. Oregon State, I think, just has too much writing against them, that other things have to go their way as well to get out of that 3rd round game to start. So I think they're going to end up starting on Saturday, one way or the other. They're 8-6 right now. Again, 1 game behind Santa Clara. But as of right now, they need a 2-game swing to be able to kind of to pick that up. Also, that does require, I think, Oregon State to get a win against USF next week. And we will see how that goes. Again, they've defended the home court well. It's very possible that they can beat the Dons up at Gill Coliseum, but this is an if-and scenario, and a lot has to go their way, I think, to get up to one of those top 4 seeds. LMU and Washington State are in flux right now. Both of them not playing particularly well. Did talk about how Washington State did snap its losing streak when they beat Pepperdine last Saturday, but then they dropped the game to St. Mary's, not unexpectedly, but now they have lost 6 of their last 7. LMU has now lost 4 of its last 5. Both of these teams seem to be moving in reverse at the moment. And it really just seems that between these 2, it's who's going to just outlast each other. And looking at the remaining 3 games, it probably does favor Washington State a little bit more than it does LMU. LMU is at Santa Clara, they have Pepperdine, and then they finish off with St. Mary's. Washington State, the first 2 are rough. They are home for Gonzaga, home for Santa Clara, and then they wrap it up with San Diego and at Pepperdine. And on paper, I would think that this feels like 2-2 for Washington State and 1-2 for LMU. And if that's the case, these two would end up tied to wrap up conference play. And if they're tied, or actually looking at this, if I'm looking at 2-2 and 1-2, that does give LMU the one game advantage. So Washington State does need to play essentially 2 games better than LMU to have a shot at getting into that third round game or third round starting point on Saturday rather than Friday. Washington State does feel like it's probably trapped in that second round matchup based on the matchups that they have coming up. But it's very possible they could get that Santa Clara game. Again, thinking about those injuries, they played well in their building. They're 9-4 at the Palouse this season. So they have played much better in their building. They played much better against St. Mary's in that building earlier on in conference play. They beat USF up there. So they have some success. They've had a ton of success in their building, defending the home court. They just have not done that on the road. So looking at that as well, on how maybe Washington State might be able to leapfrog LMU. I just think it's going to be a hard task with just 4 games left for these teams. And then just taking a look at the rest of those matchups down at the bottom, Portland has been playing well again. Like they've won 3 of their last 4. They're 5-9 in conference play at this point. So they have a little bit of momentum moving in their direction. That will play well considering who Pepperdine still has to face, who San Diego still has to face. I mean, San Diego is probably they're probably locked in at being in the first round game on Thursday. Portland probably has the best shot at staying put in the second round as well. Pepperdine and Pacific, these last few games are going to be critical to figure out who goes where, because they're only separated by a half game with just the 2 weeks left. All right, so want to talk about a couple of the key games that are coming up on Thursday, because there are a few here that at least I think are going to be more interesting. So the full slate going into Wednesday, we have Gonzaga at Washington State, and then we have Portland at St. Mary's. And on Thursday, it's Oregon State at Pepperdine, Pacific at USF, and then LMU at Santa Clara. And I'll start with that LMU and Santa Clara game, because this was a game down in LA just about a month ago that LMU won. They won that first matchup 57-54. This was an ugly game for both of these teams. LMU shot 3 for 18 from 3. Santa Clara went 4 for 26. And it really was, the offense for Santa Clara was carried by 2 guys. It was carried by Adama Ball, and it was carried by Christoph Tilley, which is why when I mentioned that it's critical for this game that those two be healthy, this is why. They scored 39 of the 54 points that Santa Clara scored against the Lions on that night. No one else was in double figures. No one else really made a significant impact in that game. And thinking that, that these two might be absent, or one or the other might be absent, is a big factor to what Santa Clara is going to look like in a contest like this. Even though this is LMU going on the road and trying to win at Santa Clara, which will not be easy, not having those two around changes the entire equation on what you look for in a matchup like this. Especially when you consider LMU has allowed 80-plus points in the last 2 games. And Santa Clara, as we know, is one of the better offensive teams in the WCC. LMU is going to need to play that defense that we saw in the first matchup to be able to pull off the game on the road. They need to control the pace. They need to muck this game up. Santa Clara does really not like those scenarios where they have to play slower. They have to fight through better defenses. We saw what happened at St. Mary's, even though, yes, without those two, I thought they gave St. Mary's a pretty good run, but they didn't get the regular performances we're used to seeing from certain guys. Carlos Stewart was 3 for 12 in the game against St. Mary's, 1 for 6 from 3. Even looking at what we saw in the matchup against LMU, that was one where we saw Stewart have 4 points, 1 for 8 from the field. He was 0 for 5 from 3. The rest of that lineup, again, I mentioned 39 of the 54. That means that the rest of the team had 15 points. And they need somebody else to come through. Now, Jake Ensminger, I thought, had a really nice game last week against St. Mary's. That's someone I think they would need to really step up. They need Tyree Bryan to also have a big night as well. They need someone else other than just those two to show up on a night where they really do need it. Again, with this last charge that the Broncos are going to try to have to get to the 3 seed, get to a 2 seed, they need it all to fall into place, and it does start on Thursday night against this LMU team. And this LMU team needs to take advantage of Santa Clara's mistakes. They were able to do that. Points off turnovers, they had the advantage 12-4 in that first matchup. There wasn't a whole lot of separation in this game. So if LMU can continue to keep pace, stay in these ball games, they will have a shot to pull off the sweep against Santa Clara. And especially if they do not have to tangle with Adama Ball or Christoph Till. Okay, so the other matchup in the early part of the week that I think that we have to discuss is Gonzaga at Washington State. Now, these two teams, I think, are in very different places from the last time that they met. The last time that these two faced off with each other, Gonzaga really wasn't playing all that great a defense. They were in that window where lost to Santa Clara, they lost to Oregon State. They were still trying to figure out how to get out of that hole, out of that defensive funk. And Washington State, since then, has really just continued to slide on the defensive end, and the turnovers, while they did get a little bit better leading up into the weekend, it came right back to the forefront with those 16 turnovers on Saturday against St. Mary's. But the first match between these two, Gonzaga won 88-75, and in that first half, it seemed like everything went Washington State's way, but they were still trailing by 3. Washington State shot 53% for the game. Nate Kelmy had 20 points, 8 assists. Lawan Watts had 17, 5, and 6. Gonzaga shot 55% for the game, and it was the 67% in the second half that really was the turning point. That they came out of the second half and just jumped on the Cougs from the get-go. So that was something that obviously was a big key. Like, Gonzaga's done a really good job over the last month of making those second half adjustments. We saw that against USF. We saw that against Washington State. We've seen that again. We've seen that a number of times of Gonzaga coming out really well in the second half, which we did not see that happen nearly as much early on in the season, where that was actually a pain point. That was actually something they struggled with a lot early on in the non-conference. Neither team took care of the basketball all that well. Gonzaga had 13 turnovers. Washington State had 16. But going into this one, yes, the turnovers are always going to be a key for Washington State because the number is usually so high for them. If they can keep it to 12, get it down to 10, they're going to put themselves in a much better position. They need Ethan Price to have a much better game than he did the last time. He had 2 points, 1 for 4 from the field in the first outing. Dane Erickstrup did not shoot as well as we're used to seeing. He was 5 for 13. And they have to limit the second chance points. That was something that Gonzaga punished them on, and the Zags were plus 11 in that category. And for Gonzaga, for me, I think that's very simple what the key is. It's the defense. Since the Santa Clara game, mentioned before, they have held 6 of their 7 opponents to 62 or fewer points. If they can continue that, obviously, not necessarily all down to 62 points, but if they can go on the road and carry that defense along with them, they're going to obviously put themselves in a great position to close that game out. Michael Ajayi continuing to have the energy off the bench he's had of late. I think he's been a key part of that. Now that he's finally found a role, he feels a little bit more comfortable in it. We're starting to see some of the best out of Ajayi the last few weeks. and those second half adjustments, continuing those strong halftime changes have been very critical for Gonzaga to kind of pull away in some of these games. So that's going to be another thing to kind of watch for. And then additionally, maybe the one other thing thinking about Gonzaga in this game against Washington State, if this game ends up close, can they close out on the road in a hostile environment against one of their future Pac-12 foes, their rival down the road? This is going to feel much more like a rivalry game. So maybe we think about all the other things that that this team did this well, that team did this well. Well, you know what? Maybe those things don't matter as much in what could be a budding rivalry game. That this game does mean a little bit more to the Eastern Washington community. That this will mean more for Washington State. This will mean more for Gonzaga. And what Gonzaga does in the close game scenario, we have yet to see them really turn that around and complete the deal. Most of the time we see like they end up actually separating themselves a little bit more, so it's not this late game 1 or 2 possession scenario that we haven't seen them close out. But they haven't really needed to do that over the last 7 games. Again, 6-1. The one was St. Mary's, and yes, they did not close that game out. And this could be another game where that opportunity presents itself. And they're going to need Nolan Hickman. They're going to need Ryan Nembhard to play their best. This is also a week where Ryan Nembhard has the opportunity to possibly claim the WCC's record in assists. So there's a lot that's going to go into this game, a lot of kind of statistical things, but also rivalry moments in this contest. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. It's an earlier start, 6 p.m. on ESPN2. But I do expect the Zags to win this game. I do expect this game to not be actually all that close. But Washington State, we know they have the offense. It's a matter of whether or not they can clean up enough of the turnovers and play good enough defense to stay in this game and have a chance late in this contest. All right, well, I'll do it for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube and follow along on social media at Post by Zach, at unofficial WCC pod. We will be having the Saturday live this coming weekend. This one will be coming live from Spokane, Washington, as I will be making the trip up to see Zags and St. Mary's. So I'll be coming live from my Airbnb in downtown Spokane. So that will be coming up on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Follow along on YouTube to get all the details on that. All right, well, that'll do it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.